last couple of weeks were so embarrassing. They were so ugly. They were so gross. They were so embarrassing and humiliating for a proud franchise that they felt like they had to make a move. But why didn't they do so immediately on Black Monday? Well, from what I gather, there were two things at play. Number one, they went to Joe Judge and they laid out, this is Tish and Mara, co-owners of the Giants. They laid out what they wanted moving forward and what would happen with Joe Judge's role and what would happen with the new GM. And from what I gather, Joe Judge came back the next day, and because he's remarkably stubborn and inflexible, was like, that doesn't work for me. Now, how much that played into this decision, who knows? It's a percentage. The other part of this is that they obviously are fishing for a new GM. I think they spoke to potential GMs, and the GMs that they wanted all said, we don't want Joe Judge. And to the Giants' credit, instead of square peg round hole of, okay, even though we don't necessarily make this GM hire our number one choice, we'll find a guy who will keep Joe Judge at least for a year. They cut bait with Joe Judge instead, which is the right move. I think those are the two things in play. Joe Judge has a really high opinion of himself. Very few people share that, though. Other GMs clearly didn't think he was all that impressive. And I think that there was a split in the locker room. I think some players thought he was a nice guy. He was trying his best. And others thought that he was completely in over his head. There was always an issue with the hiring of Joe Judge, and that is he was a 38-year-old first-time head coach who had never been a coordinator. And I think it's really, really hard to figure that that type of guy works when you've got a huge rebuild and you do it in the number one market for a franchise that's one of the most storied in the sport. That combination doesn't usually work. He was a special teams coach. This is not to demean anybody on any staff. And people will bring up John Harbaugh. Harbaugh had he had more experience. He also was not going into the beast of a market, and he came from coaching stock. The Harbaugh's dad was a longtime head coach. Jim Harbaugh, his brother, obviously, is a head coach and wanted to become a head coach. John Harbaugh is also an anomaly. Special teams guys don't wake up and suddenly become great head coaches. The Giants got dazzled for two reasons. Number one, Patriots ties. They've always loved Bill Belichick because he was a former Giant and thought, we'll pluck the next great one off of this tree, even though that tree only keeps producing rotten apples. The second thing is that Joe Judge talks a good game. The reason Mraz was whipped into a frenzy 2 years ago was because most of the Giants fan base was as well. And I sat here and rolled my eyes because talk is cheap. Not just about Mraz. Mraz is the most charismatic of the Giants fans that got whipped into a frenzy, but everybody was whipped into a frenzy. And I rolled my eyes saying, okay, so he wins a press conference by saying all the things people want him to say. Toughness, hard-nosed, blue-collar, blah, blah, blah. It's easy to rattle off all the things people want to hear. You got to do it. And I don't care who wins what press conference. When you hire a 38-year-old first-time head coach who's never even been in control of an offense or a defense, guess what? You've already got like 7 blocks stacked against you. At least when you rise to offensive or defensive coordinator, you've had some semblance of control over a game day operation on a significant portion of the game plan. Like the special teams coordinator has absolutely no control over what happens going into an important week, an important game, a certain matchup. He can draw up, okay, this is going to be our fake field goal. Okay, we're going to have to block the punt like this because they've got a good punt block team on the right side. But, I mean, organizing special teams, I mean, it's like rolling out the balls at dodgeball. It's nothing. Now, if you're a coordinator and you've got a game plan, this is where my 11 guys have to be on the field to defend Aaron Rodgers so that we don't lose, or this is where my 11 guys and my quarterback have to run this offense and make sure we beat Bill Belichick's defense. Now, that's something. But he was in his 30s, first-time head coach, and had never risen above special teams. Guess what? Within a Patriots organization where nobody has any control over everything except Belichick. Plus, he's come punch me. Come punch me. I want the fight. That ain't going to work, okay? It's easy to say. It's hard to do. So this was always a losing proposition, which is why I've said time and time again, I have very little respect for Joe Judge. He talks a good game, doesn't back it up. He says, I'm a direct guy. Then he's evasive. He says, tough guy, tough guy, tough guy. But then he goes out to the field and coaches like a JV coach. And he says all the things every gym teacher ever told us. That's not an NFL head coach. Now, I'm going to defend him here for a moment. If they were going to bring him back as of Christmas, and they flipped their decision on that based on the last 4 weeks, well, the last 4 weeks weren't the Giants. They had Mike Glennon and Jacob Fromm. So how fair is it to flip bringing him back versus firing him when you're doing it with the second and third string quarterbacks? That's not fair. If they were going to bring him back on Christmas, nothing that happened to the final 4 weeks should have flipped that. Do I think he was embarrassing at the podium? Yep. After that Bears loss, yes, he was embarrassing. That's who he is. Do I think that quarterback sneaks on 2nd and 11 and 3rd and 9 from inside your own end in a completely meaningless Week 18 game is embarrassing? Yes. But again, those two play calls, flip, wanted to bring him back versus firing him, that I think is silly. And that's why I don't necessarily trust going in a new direction, because these are the people making the ultimate decisions. Will they hire the right GM? Who will hire the right head coach? Who will make the right draft picks with multiple number ones? I got a tough time being sold on that. I think Judge dug his own grave because he just seemed overwhelmed all of the time. And they were wretched. And he fired Jason Garrett, and the offense got worse. And he got into a near fist fight with his offensive line coach, Mark Colombo, last year. Obviously, that's a bad look. There were some extenuating circumstances around him, but ultimately he's never going to be a really good head coach. So I don't think you worry about losing a great guy. I just think that it's once again spinning your wheels in New York, because what's the decision-making process there? A month ago, Joe Judge is your guy. A month later, no way. We got to move on. Here's your phone number, 855-212-4CBS, 855-212-4227, and on Twitter, DA on CBS. Okay, yesterday, Merez, is this a good day for your Giants or a bad day for your Giants as you wear that ultimately ridiculous Giants knit helmet hat?
It's a good day for the Giants. Is my mic still bad?
It's very hollow, but that's okay.
Okay, it's a good day for the Giants because they're finally going outside the organization, getting a head coach and a general manager aligned with one another.
Which is something you've wanted for a while.
Yes, absolutely had to be done, and frankly should have been done 2 years ago.
So you were relieved when you heard the news?
Yes, because I felt as if they didn't fire Judge, they were only going to hire directly people that work with him, and that's not casting a true wide net and getting the right general manager.
You still think, though, that Joe Judge is going to be a good head coach?
Yes. Now, I think it's going to take a long time to rebuild himself, and I think the last couple of weeks of press conferences haven't helped him. But, yes, ultimately, I think Joe Judge was dealt a horrible hand here, and I think he is a good football coach and will get an opportunity, whether it's a head coach in college or the NFL. Once again, he's still very young, and I think he ultimately will have learned from this and be a good head coach, yes.
What makes you think he could be a good head coach?
Well, I've seen him over 2 years out-coach Pete Carroll, out-coach Sean Payton, out-coach Andy Reid, get the most out of his team when they were dragging dog turds around the field. And in the end, had to muck up a lot of games and play sloppy because, as several scouts have said, they still have gone backwards on the offensive line. And the biggest problem with the team was the offense. The one side of the ball the owner forced on him with Jason Garrett and his entire offensive system. He was hamstrung from the beginning. A general manager with all the power and an offensive coordinator and the whole one side of the ball being directly linked to the owner. That's very difficult to play good football and do things the way you want to do it as a head coach when you're stuck with that.
Do you think that this offseason will you have good candidates for the job at GM, or do you think that there's going to be GMs that are highly considered but leery of this job because of all of the turnover and a bad roster?
I think they would have been leery of the job if they were forced to keep Judge and they would have walked away. I don't think that's the case. The Giants now have 2 top 7 picks this year. You don't get that. You don't walk into a situation with 2 top 7 picks. That's an enormous amount of assets. So I think they will ultimately get the right general manager that they believe in. Now, they could still whiff on it completely, but some of the names and from the organizations they've talked to, I think this is headed in the right direction.
I wonder what the next step for Judge is, because he can't go back to being a defensive coordinator because he's not a defensive coordinator. Does he go from head coach at 38 to at 40 years old, the special teams guy in Dallas?
I mean, he could. He also coached like positional groupings of defenses on top of special teams. Like he was a linebackers coach. He does. It's not just like he has a complete background in special teams. He's coached everything under Saban and Belichick. Just hasn't formally been an offensive or defensive coordinator.
Okay.
So he's probably a positional coach on the Patriots next year.
So he becomes linebackers coach with the Patriots.
Something like that. Yeah. Like if Gerard Mayo goes and Patricia moves up, boom, there's Judge back with New England like so many of these guys are. Or he's back with Saban as his special teams coach, something like that.
Oh, God. Going from a head coach in the NFL at 38 to 2 years later, the linebackers coach with the Colts or the special teams coach in Alabama. By the way, as I mentioned, Pete, 2 years ago, Mraz had his very emotional defense of Joe Judge's hire. What do you say that at some point this morning, and maybe sprinkled throughout the morning, we play a few of our favorite clips from that?
Oh, they're in the queue. They will be, when we come back from breaks, you will be hearing them throughout the course of the program, starting at the end of this hour.
Okay. All right. Well, that's something to look forward to, because it's one of the great rants, emotional rants ever. Mraz points at us, wags his finger. You'll see.